from my stall. Get to that. Oh.
The voice tore through the early morning market like a whip crack. Ngozi's head snapped up from her pot of boiling yam. Across the narrow dirt road, Madame Bai was charging at three small figures huddled near her vegetable stand, her wrapper flapping like war flags, her arm raised with a stick. "Street rats, thieves, I will break your bones today." The boys scattered like leaves in a storm, identical faces, identical terror, identical rags hanging from their thin shoulders. They stumbled over each other, barefoot on the sharp gravel, and collapsed in a heap against the gutter wall. The smallest one's head hit the concrete. No cry came out, just silence. The market watched. No one moved. Madame Bai spat in their direction and returned to her vegetables, dusting her hands as if she'd just disposed of garbage. Ngozi's fingers tightened around her wooden ladle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew those boys. Everyone knew those boys. The triplets. The cursed ones. The street ghosts who appeared and disappeared like smoke, always together, always silent, always hungry. Welcome to TJ's story, where every tale carries a lesson, and every lesson changes a life. Now, let the story continue. The sun had barely risen over the zinc-roofed shacks of the market, but Ngozi had already been awake for 3 hours. Sleep was a luxury for people who had full bellies and roofs that didn't leak. She had neither. Her own night had begun at 2 a.m. when the rain found the new hole above her sleeping mat and dripped cold water onto her face. She'd moved the mat. The rain found her again. She'd moved it once more, into the corner where the mold grew thick and black, and lay there until her bones ached and the rats became too bold. By 4 a.m., she was up, wrapping her thin headscarf, pulling her faded wrapper around her waist, and whispering the only prayer she knew by heart. "God, I have nothing, but let today bring something." Her roadside food stall was not a stall by any proud definition. It was a broken table, a blackened pot, a small coal stove that coughed smoke into her eyes, and a cracked wooden bench her father had made 30 years ago. The bench had outlived him. That said something about the cruelty of the world. She sold what she could afford to make. Boiled yams, fried plantains when she had oil, watery pepper soup when someone gave her bones. Most days, she made just enough to buy ingredients for the next day. Some days, not even that. But she was alive. That counted for something. Ngozi set her pot on the stove and added the yams she'd bought late last night when the price dropped. 6 pieces. If she sold 4, she could eat one and buy sugar for her tea. If she sold 5, she could buy a little salt and maybe some dried fish. If she sold all 6, she allowed herself a small smile. If she sold all 6, she'd buy a new headscarf. The one she wore had been tied and retied so many times the fabric had thinned to cobwebs in places. The market began to stir. Traders greeted each other with the false warmth of people who competed for the same 10 customers. Ngozi greeted no one. She had learned long ago that friendliness was often mistaken for weakness, and weakness invited trouble. She stirred her pot and watched the street. And that was when she saw them. The triplets. They sat across the road in the same place they always sat, beneath the broken awning of the abandoned pharmacy. 3 boys, no older than 10, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Hunger-aged children in strange ways. Their clothes were rags stitched together with hope and dirt. Their hair was matted. Their skin stretched tight over sharp bones. But it was their faces that haunted her. Identical, perfectly, unnaturally identical. The same sharp chin. The same wide eyes. The same expression of quiet endurance that made grown men look away in discomfort. She had seen them many times before. Everyone had. They never begged, never stole, never cried. They simply existed, 3 shadows that moved as one, that sat in silence, that watched the world with eyes too old for their faces. The market had named them many things. The ghost boys, the cursed triplets, the silent ones. Mothers pulled their children away from them. Traders claimed they brought bad luck. One man swore he'd seen them appear out of thin air one night during a thunderstorm, sent by witches to punish the town. Ngozi didn't believe in witches, but she believed in hunger. She knew its face. She wore it herself. She watched them now as her yams boiled. The smallest one, his head still bleeding slightly from where it had struck the wall, leaned against his brother's. The other two adjusted their position so he was sheltered between them, protected. They did not speak. They did not need to. Ngozi's stomach tightened. She looked down at her pot. 6 yams, 6 pieces between her and tomorrow. She looked back at the boys. If I feed them, what will I eat? The question sat in her chest like a stone. It was the question every poor person asked when faced with someone poorer. The question that separated the living from the surviving. Her hand hovered over the ladle. They are not your children, a voice in her mind whispered. You owe them nothing. You have nothing. If you give, you will have less than nothing. But another voice, quieter, older, spoke beneath it. Her mother's voice. Dead now for 12 years, but still living in Ngozi's bones. A person who eats alone dies alone. Ngozi closed her eyes. She took a long breath. Then she ladled 1 yam onto a chipped enamel plate, added a small handful of pepper sauce, and before she could change her mind, before reason could stop her, she crossed the road. The boys saw her coming. Their bodies tensed like animals expecting a blow. The 2 older ones shifted in front of the youngest, shielding him. Ngozi stopped a few feet away. She held out the plate. Eat, she said simply. They stared at her, suspicious, disbelieving. I am not Madame Bai, Ngozi said, her voice softer now. I will not chase you. Eat. The boy in the middle, the one with the scar above his eyebrow, looked at his brothers. Some silent agreement passed between them. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took the plate. Ngozi turned and walked back to her stall. She did not watch them eat. She could not. If she watched, she might cry, and crying was another luxury she could not afford. But she heard them. The soft scrape of fingers against enamel. The careful division of the yam into 3 equal portions. No fighting, no rushing, just quiet, disciplined sharing. When she finally glanced over, the plate was empty and placed neatly on the ground. The boys were watching her. And for the first time since she'd noticed them months ago, one of them nodded. Just once, a single dip of the head. It was enough. That night, as Ngozi lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling where the new leak had spread into a dark stain shaped like a hand, one thought would not leave her mind. What had she just started? Would you have fed them if you were as poor as she was? Drop your answer below, and don't forget to subscribe to TJ's Story for more powerful tales that will change how you see the world. The boys returned the next morning. Ngozi saw them before the sun fully broke through the smoke-stained sky. 3 identical silhouettes, standing across the road in the exact same spot, watching her stall with the patience of stones. She pretended not to notice. She stirred her pot of boiling cassava, adjusted her headscarf, rearranged her small pile of peppers. But her hands trembled slightly, and she knew they could see it. Finally, she looked up and met their eyes. The boy with the scar, the one who had taken the plate yesterday, stepped forward. Just 1 step. His brothers remained behind him like shadows. Ngozi understood. He was their voice, their shield, their leader. She nodded once, ladled cassava and pepper sauce onto the same chipped plate, and walked it across to them. This time, they did not flinch when she approached. This time, the smallest one, the one whose head had bled against the wall, looked up at her and whispered 2 words that nearly broke her. Thank you. His voice was so soft it could have been the wind, but Ngozi heard it. She heard it in her bones. She returned to her stall and watched from the corner of her eye as they divided the food with surgical precision. 3 equal portions, not a grain of cassava wasted. They ate slowly, chewing each bite as if memorizing the taste. When they finished, they did not run away. They sat there across the road and simply existed in her presence, and somehow that felt like trust. By the end of the first week, a routine had formed. The boys arrived at dawn. Ngozi fed them 1 plate, always 1 plate divided 3 ways. They ate in silence. They stayed nearby, never asking for more, never causing trouble. And when the afternoon heat drove most people indoors, They disappeared like smoke into the maze of streets behind the market. Ngozi learned their rhythms. She learned that the boy with the scar always ate last, making sure his brothers finished first. She learned that the middle boy, the one with the curious eyes, watched everything. The way she stirred her pot, the way she counted her money, the way she measured her ingredients. And she learned that the smallest one, the quiet observer, never smiled, but sometimes his eyes softened when he looked at her. She did not know their names. She did not ask. Names made things real. Names made things hurt. But the market noticed. Oh, the market noticed everything. Ngozi, you are feeding those cursed boys again. Madame Bai's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. She stood at her vegetable stand, hands on her wide hips, her face twisted in disgust. Ngozi did not look up. They are children, Madame. Children get hungry. Children, Madame Bai laughed, sharp and cruel. Those are not children. Those are demons. Street demons sent to bring misfortune. You watch, anyone who helps them will suffer. Other traders murmured in agreement. A few nodded. One woman made the sign of the cross. Ngozi stirred her pot and said nothing. But that afternoon, 3 of her regular customers walked past her stall without stopping. One woman who always bought her fried yams looked at her, looked at the boys sitting across the road, and shook her head before walking to Madame Bai's stand instead. Ngozi's stomach knotted. By the end of the second week, her sales had dropped by half. People whispered when she passed. Mothers pulled their children closer. Even the bread seller who used to greet her warmly now looked away when their eyes met. You are losing customers, Trader Ezekiel said one evening as he packed up his dried fish. He was an old man, kind in the way that old men who have suffered often are. People are afraid of those boys. They think you are inviting bad luck. Do you think I am inviting bad luck? Ngozi asked quietly. Ezekiel looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. No, I think you are inviting trouble, and trouble is worse than bad luck because trouble is real. He was right. The trouble came in small cruelties at first. Madame Bai began sending customers to other stalls, loudly declaring that Ngozi's food carried strange spirits. A group of young men started mocking her, calling her Mama Ghost and laughing when she passed. One morning, she arrived to find her stall overturned, her pots scattered in the dirt. No one admitted to it. No one helped her clean up. But the boys did. They appeared silently, as they always did, and began picking up her scattered belongings without a word. The leader, the one with the scar, righted her table with hands stronger than she expected. The curious one gathered her peppers into a careful pile. The quiet one found her wooden ladle in the gutter and washed it clean with rainwater from a puddle. Ngozi watched them, her throat tight. You don't have to do this, she whispered. The leader looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just hunger or fear. She saw loyalty. The days grew harder. Ngozi's money ran low. Some mornings, she could barely afford ingredients for one pot of food, but still, she fed them, even when it meant she went to bed with an empty stomach, even when her own body began to hollow out, her ribs pressing against her wrapper like prison bars. She told herself she would stop. Tomorrow she would stop. Tomorrow she would think of herself first. But tomorrow never came. One evening, as the market emptied and the sun bled red across the horizon, Ngozi sat on her bench, counting her coins. 7 small pieces, not enough for tomorrow's ingredients, not enough for anything. She heard footsteps and looked up. The boys were leaving, heading toward the back streets as they always did. But this time they stopped. They turned, and the leader spoke. His voice was quiet but clear. We will not forget. The 3 of them stood there, silhouettes against the dying light, their faces identical and solemn. We will not forget you, he said again. Then they turned and disappeared into the shadows. Ngozi sat alone in the empty market, those words echoing in her chest. We will not forget. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that kindness mattered, that sacrifice meant something, that the universe kept accounts. But deep down, in the part of her that had been broken by life too many times, she doubted. She doubted everything. One morning, Ngozi arrived at her stall with her last handful of ingredients and the weight of the world on her shoulders. She lit her coal stove. She set her pot to boil. She arranged her small bench and waited. The sun rose, the market stirred, traders shouted their greetings. But the boys did not come. Ngozi looked across the road. The spot beneath the broken awning was empty. She waited. An hour passed, then two. Still empty. Her chest tightened. She stood and walked across the road, looking down the alley where they always disappeared. Nothing, no sign, no sound. Looking for your little demons. Madame Bai's voice dripped with satisfaction. Street boys come and go, Ngozi. They used you for food and now they are gone. That is what happens when you waste kindness on the worthless. Ngozi did not answer. She returned to her stall, her legs unsteady. They would come tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and the spot remained empty. 3 days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Ngozi searched. Every evening after the market closed, she walked through the tangled back streets where the homeless gathered. She asked the beggars, the night watchmen, the women who sold food under flickering kerosene lamps. 3 boys, identical faces, always together. Most people shook their heads. A few claimed to remember them. One old woman said she'd seen them weeks ago, heading toward the main road with a tall man in clean clothes. But her eyes were cloudy with cataracts, and her memory was unreliable. Ngozi searched until her feet bled, until her voice went hoarse from calling names she didn't even know. And then the rain came. It started as a drizzle, soft and apologetic, but within minutes it became a downpour, the kind of rain that turned streets into rivers and poverty into disaster. Ngozi stood in the middle of the empty market, water streaming down her face, her wrapper clinging to her thin body. "Where are you?" she screamed into the storm. Her voice disappeared into the thunder. "Please, just let me know you are alive." Lightning split the sky. The rain pounded harder. No answer came. She collapsed onto her bench, her body shaking with cold and grief. People passed her, hurrying for shelter, their eyes sliding away from the crazy woman crying in the rain. Madame Bai stood under her covered stall, watching with something that might have been pity or might have been triumph. "I told you," she called over the storm. "Kindness to the worthless is wasted." Ngozi did not respond. She sat in the rain until it stopped, sat until the sky cleared, sat until the market traders returned and pretended she wasn't there. Weeks became months. At first, Ngozi kept a small portion of food aside each day, wrapped in banana leaves, just in case they returned. She placed it in the spot where they used to sit, beneath the broken awning. Every evening, she threw it away untouched. After a month, she stopped setting food aside. After 2 months, she stopped looking at the empty spot across the road. After 3 months, she convinced herself she had imagined the softness in the quiet one's eyes, imagined the gratitude in the curious one's face, imagined the promise in the leader's voice. "We will not forget." Lies, she thought, pretty lies that helped her sleep at night. The market moved on. Madame Bai's mockery faded into routine cruelty. New traders arrived. Old ones left. The world turned without pause, indifferent to the small tragedy of 3 lost boys and 1 foolish woman. But Ngozi could not move on. At night, she dreamed of them, dreamed they were cold, dreamed they were hungry, dreamed they called her name and she could not reach them. She woke gasping, her thin mattress soaked with sweat, the rain still finding her through the growing holes in her roof. Some mornings, she caught herself stirring her pot and glancing across the road, expecting to see 3 identical silhouettes. The spot was always empty. Did I do the right thing? She wondered in her darkest moments. Or did I just teach myself to hope in a world that punishes hope? She had no answer. The street felt different now. Even when it was full of people, full of noise and commerce and life, it felt empty, hollowed out, like something essential had been removed and no one else had noticed. Only Ngozi noticed. Only Ngozi remembered. Years passed. Ngozi's hair turned gray at the temples. Her hands developed permanent calluses from stirring her pots. Her back bent slightly from decades of leaning over her small coal stove. The rainy seasons came and went, each one finding new ways through her roof, new places to torment her sleep. Her stall deteriorated. The table her father made finally split down the middle. She tied it together with old rope, but it leaned at an angle now, crooked and sad. Her pots grew fewer. Her customers grew older or died or moved to newer markets with brighter lights. But she remained. Every morning, she woke in the dark. Every morning, she prayed the same prayer. Every morning, she set up her stall and sold just enough to survive until tomorrow. The market changed around her. New buildings rose. Old ones fell. Madame Bai expanded her vegetable stand into a proper shop with a metal roof and a freezer that hummed day and night. Other traders prospered or failed or disappeared. But Ngozi's corner remained the same. A broken table, a blackened pot, a cracked wooden bench, a woman who had once fed 3 hungry boys and never saw them again. People called her faithful, they called her patient, they called her stubborn. Behind her back, they called her foolish. Still waiting for those ghost boys, Madame Bai would ask sometimes, her voice honeyed with false concern. Still believing your kindness mattered. Ngozi never answered. What was there to say? But every single day, without fail, she glanced across the road at the spot beneath the broken awning. Still empty. Always empty. Until it wasn't. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The kind of afternoon that had happened 10,000 times before. The sun hung heavy in a white sky. The market buzzed with its usual chaos. Ngozi stirred her pot, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. And then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A sound the street had never heard before. 3 engines, deep and powerful, rolling closer. The market fell silent. Ngozi looked up. 3 black Mercedes-Benz sedans turned onto her street, moving slowly, like panthers stalking prey. Their chrome gleamed. Their windows were tinted dark. Their tires crunched over the broken road with the confidence of vehicles that had never known poverty. The entire market stopped. Traders abandoned their stalls. Children froze mid-game. Even Madame Bai stood with her mouth open, a half-cut cabbage forgotten in her hands. The cars stopped, right in the middle of the street, right in front of Ngozi's stall. The engines went silent. For a moment, nothing moved. The world held its breath. Then the doors opened. 3 men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in suits so crisp they looked like they'd been ironed onto their bodies. Their shoes reflected the sun. Their watches caught the light. But it was their faces that made Ngozi's wooden ladle slip from her fingers and clatter against the pot. Identical faces. The same sharp chin, the same wide eyes, the same features she had seen 1,000 times in her dreams. But older now, stronger, transformed. The men walked toward her stall in perfect synchronization, their eyes locked on hers. The crowd parted like water. Ngozi couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. The man in front, the one with a faint scar above his eyebrow, stopped 3 feet from her stall. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of cloth. Faded, torn, stained. The same cloth the boys had worn as rags years ago. He held it up so she could see, so the whole market could see. Then he knelt. His brothers knelt beside him. 3 grown men in expensive suits, kneeling in the dirt of a poor street. The leader looked up at Ngozi, and his eyes, those same eyes that had watched her with hunger and hope and trust, filled with tears. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking, "it's us." The market exploded into chaos, gasps, shouts. Madame Bai's cabbage hit the ground. But Ngozi heard none of it. She stared at the 3 men kneeling before her, and the world tilted sideways. The smallest one, the quiet observer who never smiled, was smiling now, tears streaming down his face. The middle one, The curious one who had watched everything spoke next, his voice thick with emotion. "We told you we would not forget." Ngozi's legs gave out. She gripped the edge of her broken table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "How?" she whispered. "How?" The leader stood and stepped closer. He took her trembling hands in his. "You fed us when you had nothing," he said. "You protected us when the world wanted us gone. You taught us that we mattered." He paused, his grip tightening. "Everything we are, we owe to you." The crowd pressed closer, straining to hear. Madame Bai's face had gone pale. Ngozi looked at the three men, no, the three boys, and saw the impossible. The hungry children she'd fed with her last scraps of food had become this. "What happened to you?" she breathed. The leader smiled. "That," he said, "is a long story." He glanced at his brothers. They nodded. "But Mama," he continued, turning back to her, "we didn't come back just to say thank you. When kindness starts hurting you, should you stop? Do small acts of kindness really matter, or are they forgotten? Comment below and let me know. And if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to TJ's Story. You don't want to miss what happens next. But before we hear what brought them back, we must understand what Ngozi endured while they were gone. Those years had not been kind to her. The first year after the boys disappeared, Ngozi still had hope. She told herself they'd found a better life somewhere, that they were safe, that they were fed. Every morning, she woke with the possibility that today might be the day they returned. But hope is a heavy thing to carry when nothing feeds it. By the second year, her body began to show the cost of her sacrifice. The meals she'd given away had been meals stolen from her own stomach. Her cheeks hollowed. Her wrapper, already loose, now hung on her frame like fabric on a skeleton. Her arms, once strong from years of stirring heavy pots, grew thin and weak. The rainy season that year was merciless. The holes in her roof multiplied like wounds. She would lie awake at night, moving her mat from puddle to puddle until there was nowhere dry left to sleep. Some nights, she simply sat upright until dawn, wrapped in her thinnest blanket, shivering and praying for morning. Her stalls suffered alongside her. The table her father had built, the one that had survived 3 decades, finally gave up. One leg splintered completely during a particularly busy afternoon, sending her pot of soup crashing to the ground. She watched her day's profits seep into the dirt, and for the first time in her adult life, Ngozi sat in the middle of the market and wept openly. No one helped her clean up. She tied the table together with rope she bought from a passing trader. It cost her the money she'd saved for rice. That night, she ate nothing. The table leaned now, permanently crooked, tilting like a drunk man. Customers commented on it. Some laughed. Madame Bai suggested loudly that Ngozi's bad luck from those demon boys was finally showing itself. Ngozi said nothing. She had learned that silence was cheaper than defense. Her pots grew fewer. She'd started with 4, too large, too small. By the 3rd year, she was down to 2. One large pot for boiling, one small one for sauce. The others had cracked beyond repair, their metal worn so thin that heat pierced straight through to burn the food. She couldn't afford replacements. Some weeks, she could barely afford ingredients. There were days, terrible, shameful days, when Ngozi's stall sat completely empty. No food to sell, no money to buy supplies. Just a broken table, a cold stove, and a woman sitting alone, watching the street with hollow eyes. On those days, Trader Ezekiel would sometimes leave a small bundle of dried fish near her stall when he thought she wasn't looking. She always was, and she always whispered a thank you to his retreating back. But even Ezekiel's kindness couldn't fill all the empty days. The market around her transformed, while she remained frozen in time. New traders arrived with big dreams and bigger capital. They built proper stalls with zinc roofs and glass displays. They brought refrigerators that hummed with electricity Ngozi had never been able to afford. They sold exotic vegetables and imported rice and things Ngozi couldn't even name. Madame Bai's vegetable stand became Madame Bai's grocery store. 2 employees, a generator, a painted sign. She hired young girls to shout at passersby, advertising her fresh stock and fair prices. "Not like some people's cursed food," Madame Bai would say, loud enough for everyone to hear, her eyes always sliding toward Ngozi's corner. The insult had lost its sting years ago. Ngozi had discovered that you couldn't wound someone who had already bled out. But still, she remained. Every single morning, despite the pain in her joints, despite the hunger in her belly, despite the mockery and the poverty and the relentless weight of surviving, Ngozi woke up in the dark. She wrapped her faded headscarf, the same one from years ago, now held together by prayers and stubbornness. She lit her coal stove with trembling hands. She set up her crooked table. And she waited. For what, she could no longer say. The boys were gone. They weren't coming back. Any rational person would have accepted this truth years ago. But Ngozi had stopped being rational the day she'd chosen to feed 3 hungry children with food she couldn't spare. So she waited. And every single day, without fail, her eyes would drift across the road to the spot beneath the broken awning. The spot where 3 identical boys used to sit. The spot where they'd divided one plate into 3 equal portions. The spot where they'd promised they would not forget. The spot that remained empty. Year after year after year. People called her devoted. They said she had the patience of a saint. They praised her endurance, her faith, her unshakable presence in that corner of the market. But Ngozi knew the truth. She wasn't waiting out of faith. She was waiting because she had nowhere else to go, nothing else to do, no other purpose left in a life that had slowly contracted to this one small corner of existence. Waiting was all she had. By the 5th year, even her prayers had changed. She no longer prayed for the boys to return. She prayed only that they were alive somewhere, that they had found food, shelter, kindness, that they had forgotten her completely if it meant they were happy. "I hope you are eating well," she would whisper to the empty spot across the road when the market was quiet. "I hope someone is taking care of you. I hope you are warm." The empty spot never answered. Madame Bai still mocked her, but even the mockery had grown tired, stale, repetitive. Still watching that spot, Ngozi, still believing those boys mattered. Ngozi would simply nod. Yes, she was still watching. Yes, she still believed they mattered. Because if they didn't matter, if those 3 hungry children she'd fed meant nothing, then what had she sacrificed for? What had these years of suffering been for? She couldn't afford to believe her kindness had been wasted. That belief was the only thing keeping her alive. So she endured. Through rainy seasons that tried to drown her, through dry seasons that cracked her skin and parched her throat, through sickness and hunger and loneliness that sat on her chest at night like a physical weight. She endured because she didn't know how to do anything else. The market traders began to treat her like furniture, something that had always been there and always would be. They stopped greeting her, stopped acknowledging her existence. She became invisible, a ghost haunting her own corner of the world. Some nights, lying on her mat, staring at the ceiling with its constellation of holes and water stains, Ngozi wondered if she had already died and simply hadn't noticed. Maybe this was the afterlife, an eternity of waiting, an eternity of hopping, an eternity of watching an empty spot across the road and remembering 3 boys who had needed her. Maybe hell wasn't fire and demons. Maybe it was just this, endless, hollow waiting. But she got up anyway. Every morning. Every single morning. Because what else was there to do? And then, on an afternoon that felt like every other afternoon in a decade of identical afternoons, the street heard an unfamiliar sound. 3 engines, deep and powerful. Ngozi looked up from her pot, her wooden ladle suspended in midair, her heart doing something strange in her chest. The sound grew louder. Closer. And everything changed. The first Mercedes turned the corner like a dark dream made metal and glass. The market's usual chaos stuttered and stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. The bread seller's song choked off. Children froze in their games. Even the flies seemed to pause their lazy circles around rotting fruit. Nobody in this street had ever seen a car like that. Not here. Not in this forgotten corner where the roads were more hole than pavement, where chickens wandered freely through open sewers, where wealth meant having enough to eat tomorrow. The Mercedes moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if aware of its own obscenity in this place. Its black paint gleamed so perfectly it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The chrome accents caught the sun and threw it back like accusations. Then came the second Mercedes, identical to the first, just as black, just as impossible. And then the third. The market collectively held its breath. Madame Bai stood in front of her grocery store, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth, a piece of bread forgotten between her fingers. Her eyes were wide, her expression caught between shock and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. The vehicles came to a stop, directly in front of Ngozi's stall. Not near it, not approximately in the area. Directly in front. The engines cut off in perfect synchronization. The sudden silence was louder than any sound. Ngozi stood behind her crooked table, her ladle still in her hand, her mouth dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like something desperate to escape. The rear door of the first Mercedes opened. A man stepped out. The market gasped. He was tall, taller than Ngozi remembered, but then, boys do grow. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Ngozi had earned in her entire life. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His watch caught the light with the casual arrogance of expensive things. But it was his face that made Ngozi's ladle slip from her fingers. She knew that face. The doors of the second and third Mercedes opened. 2 more men emerged, identically dressed, identically tall, identically transformed. But their faces, oh God, their faces. Identical to each other, identical to the face in her dreams. The crowd pushed closer, a living wall of curiosity and disbelief. Voices rose in confused whispers. Who are they? What are they doing here? Are they government officials? Did someone die? But Ngozi couldn't hear them. Couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in her ears and the small voice in her head screaming impossibly, impossibly. It's them. The 3 men stood together for a moment, surveying the street with expressions Ngozi couldn't read. Then, moving as one, as they'd always moved, they began walking toward her stall. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Every eye in the market watched, every breath was held. The men stopped 3 feet from Ngozi's crooked table. Up close, she could see details that shattered her heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. The first man, the one who had emerged from the lead car, had a faint scar above his right eyebrow, a scar from a childhood accident, a scar from being thrown against a wall. The second man had eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything, missing nothing. Curious, intelligent, alive with the same hunger to understand that she remembered from years ago. The third man stood slightly behind the others, quieter, more reserved. But when his eyes met hers, they held a depth of feeling that made her knees weak. The first man reached into his jacket. The crowd tensed. Madame Bai took an involuntary step back. His hand emerged holding not a weapon, but a piece of cloth. Faded, torn, stained with dirt and time and memory. Ngozi's vision blurred. She knew that cloth. She had seen it every day for months, wrapped around 3 thin bodies, offering protection that was more hope than reality. The man held it up high enough for the entire market to see. Then he lowered it slowly, reverently, and pressed it to his chest. And then he knelt. The crowd gasped. His brothers knelt beside him. 3 grown men in suits worth more than most people's houses, kneeling in the red dirt of a poor street, their expensive trousers pressing into mud and dust and poverty. The market exploded into chaos. Shouts, questions, Madame Bai's bread hit the ground. But through it all, Ngozi heard only one voice. Mama. The word came from the man with the scar. His voice broke on the syllable, cracked by emotion too big for language. Mama, it's us. Ngozi couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her hands gripped the edge of her table so hard her knuckles turned white. The quiet one, the third man, spoke next, his voice thick with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. "It's Kunal, Mama. Kunal, Solar, and Tunde." Names, they had names now. They had always had names. The curious one, Solar, leaned forward, his eyes desperate. "Do you remember us, Mama? Do you remember the 3 boys you fed when you had nothing?" Did she remember? Did she remember? Ngozi's laugh came out as a sob. "I never forgot," she whispered. "Not for one day, not for 1 hour." Tunde, the leader, always the leader, stood slowly. His brothers rose with him. He stepped closer, close enough that Ngozi could see the tears tracking down his face, cutting clean lines through the dust of the street. "You fed us when the world wanted us dead," he said. "You protected us when we had no one. You shared your food when you were starving yourself." "You taught us that we mattered," Solar added, his voice shaking. "You taught us we were human," Kunal finished, so quietly Ngozi almost missed it. She shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "I did nothing, I just gave you food." "No, Mama." Tunde took her hands in his. His grip was strong, warm, alive. "You gave us everything." The crowd pressed even closer. Madame Bai had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What happened to you?" Ngozi breathed. "Where did you go? Why didn't you come back?" The 3 brothers exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, the way it always had. Solar spoke. "The day we disappeared," a man came, a teacher from the mission school across the city. He'd been watching us, watching how we stayed together, how we shared, how we survived. "He offered to take us in," Tunde continued, "to educate us, feed us, give us a chance." "We didn't want to go," Kunal added softly. "We wanted to stay near you, but he said if we didn't leave that day, the authorities would separate us, send us to different orphanages. We would never see each other again." Ngozi's hand flew to her mouth. "We had to choose," Tunde said. "Stay together and lose you, or stay with you and lose each other." "We tried to find you before we left," Solar said desperately. "We came to the market, but you weren't at your stall. We waited as long as we could, but—" "The man said it was now or never," Kunal finished. Ngozi remembered that day. The day she'd been too sick to come to the market. The day she'd lain on her mat, fever burning through her body, her shop abandoned for the first time in years. The day they'd needed her most, and she wasn't there. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "No," Tunde's voice was firm. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Because of you, because of what you taught us about kindness, about sacrifice, about mattering, we survived. We thrived. We remembered." He released her hands and stepped back, nodding to his brothers. Together they turned to face the crowd that had gathered. The entire market was there now. Every trader, every customer, every child, every person who had mocked Ngozi, ignored her, or watched her suffer. Madame Bai stood at the front, her face a mask of confusion and growing dread. Tunde's voice rang out clear and strong. "This woman fed us when she had nothing. She protected us when we were cursed. She sacrificed her own meals so we could eat. She lost customers because of us," Solar added. "Lost money, lost respect. She gave and gave and gave," Kunal said, "and asked for nothing in return." Tunde turned back to Ngozi. "Everything we are today, we owe to you. The teacher educated us, yes, but you taught us something more important. You taught us that we were worth saving, that we deserved kindness, that we mattered." He paused, his jaw tightening with emotion. "We built our lives on that foundation. We worked harder than anyone, studied longer, pushed further, because we knew somewhere a woman who had nothing had given us everything. We made a promise to each other," Solar said. "We would succeed, we would build something, and we would come back." "We would come back," Kunal repeated, "and we would repay the debt that kindness created." Tunde met Ngozi's eyes. "Mama, we didn't come back just to say thank you." He nodded to Solar, who walked to the second Mercedes and returned with a large envelope. The crowd leaned in. Tunde opened the envelope, and removed a stack of papers, official-looking documents with stamps and signatures. "We own a company now," he said. "Import and export. We started with nothing but the work ethic you instilled in us. Today, we employ over 200 people." Solar pulled out another document. "We've also invested in real estate, education initiatives, and community development." "But our first priority," Tunde said, his voice dropping to something almost sacred, "was always finding you, taking care of you, giving back what you gave us." He held out the papers to Ngozi. She stared at them, uncomprehending. "This is a deed," Tunde explained gently. "To a house, 3 bedrooms, indoor plumbing, a real roof that doesn't leak." "This," Solar added, producing another paper, "is a bank account. In your name. Enough money that you will never go hungry again, never be cold, never have to choose between feeding yourself and feeding others." "And this," Kunnel said softly, stepping forward with a small card, "is a lifetime healthcare plan, every medical expense, every treatment, covered." Ngozi shook her head. No, I can't." "Mama," Tunde's voice was gentle but firm. "You can, you will. We will not accept any other answer." "You fed us when you were starving," Solar said. "Now let us feed you." "Please," Kunnel whispered. "Please let us do this. You saved our lives, let us save yours." The market had gone completely silent. Even the chickens had stopped their clucking. Ngozi looked at the papers in Tunde's hands, at the 3 men who had once been 3 starving boys, at the impossible miracle standing before her. "I don't deserve this," she breathed. All 3 brothers shook their heads. "You deserve the world," Tunde said. "If kindness never pays back, would you still choose it?" What do you think they came back to do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for TJ's story. The final chapter is coming. You won't want to miss this ending. Ngozi's hands trembled as she looked at the papers. The words blurred through her tears. Deed, bank account, healthcare. Words that belonged to other people's lives, not hers. "I can't take this," she whispered again, trying to push the documents back toward Tunde. But he didn't move. None of them did. "Mama," Tunde said, his voice carrying across the silent market, "do you remember what you told us, the first day you fed us?" Ngozi shook her head. She couldn't remember. It was so long ago. "You said, a person who eats alone dies alone." Solar stepped forward, his eyes bright with tears. "Those words saved us. They taught us that our survival was connected to each other, that we were stronger together." "You taught us discipline when you divided that single plate into 3, Kunnel added. "You taught us dignity when you didn't treat us like street dogs. You taught us hope when the entire world had given up on us." Tunde moved closer, gently taking Ngozi's weathered hands in his. "You gave us food, yes, but you gave us something more valuable. You gave us our humanity back. You looked at 3 cursed street boys and saw children worth saving." The crowd murmured. Some wiped their eyes. Even Madame Bai had tears streaming down her face, though she tried to hide them. "We were taken to the mission school that day," Tunde continued. "The teacher, Mr. Emmanuel, he educated us, fed us, clothed us, but every single night we talked about you, about the woman who had nothing but gave everything. We promised each other," Solar said, "that we would make something of ourselves, that we would honor your sacrifice, that we would never forget." "And we didn't," Kunnel finished softly, "not for one day." Tunde released Ngozi's hands and turned to address the entire market. His voice rang with authority, the voice of a man who had built empires from nothing. "We studied harder than every other student. While they slept, we read. While they played, we worked. We graduated top of our class, all 3 of us. We won scholarships to university. We built a business from the ground up. We became successful," Solar continued, "not because we wanted wealth, but because we had a debt to repay, a debt to a woman who believed we mattered when no one else did." The market was completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tunde turned back to Ngozi. "This house, this money, this care, it's not charity, Mama. It's justice. It's the universe correcting itself. It's the reward that kindness always deserved but rarely receives. He knelt again, and his brothers knelt beside him. We are successful businessmen now, Tunde said. We have wealth, influence, respect, but none of it means anything if we can't honor the woman who made it all possible. Please, Mama, Solar begged. Let us do this, not because you need it, but because we need it. We need to know that kindness wasn't wasted, that sacrifice matters, that you matter. Ngozi looked at the three men kneeling before her, at the crowd watching with tear-stained faces, at Madame Bai, who had collapsed onto a stool, her hand covering her mouth in shock. She looked at her broken table, her chipped pots, her faded wrapper. The life she had lived for so long she'd forgotten it was suffering. And then she looked at the papers in Tunde's hands. Stand up, she said softly. The brothers looked up at her, confused. Stand up, she repeated, her voice stronger now. All of you. They stood. Ngozi reached out and pulled them close, one by one, until all three were wrapped in her thin arms. They towered over her, these successful men in expensive suits, but they bent low and held her like children who had finally found their way home. You are my sons, Ngozi whispered into their embrace. You were always my sons, from the first day I fed you. Tunde's shoulders shook with sobs. Solar buried his face in her shoulder. Kunal held her like she might disappear if he let go. The market erupted in applause, shouts of joy, weeping. Even Madame Bai was clapping, tears streaming freely down her face now. When they finally pulled apart, Tunde wiped his eyes and smiled, the first real smile Ngozi had seen on his face. Then as your sons, he said, we insist. No more roadside stall, no more leaking roof, no more hunger, no more suffering. You fed us, Solar added. Now let us feed you for the rest of your life. Ngozi looked at the papers again, at the impossible gift, at the miracle standing before her. And finally, she nodded. Yes, she whispered, yes. The market exploded again. Trader Ezekiel rushed forward to embrace her. Other traders surrounded her, apologizing for their silence, their indifference, their cruelty. Even Madame Bai approached, her head bowed in shame. I was wrong, Madame Bai said quietly. I mocked you, I called your kindness foolish, I called those boys cursed. She looked at Tunde, Solar, and Kunal. I was the cursed one, cursed by my own hardness. Forgive me. Kunal stepped forward and took Madame Bai's hand. There is nothing to forgive. You taught us that the world can be cruel. Mama taught us we didn't have to be. In the weeks that followed, Ngozi moved into her new house. 3 bedrooms, indoor plumbing, a roof that kept out every drop of rain. The brothers visited her every week, bringing food, stories, and laughter. They also transformed her corner of the market. They built a community center there, offering free meals to homeless children. They hired Ngozi as the director, not as charity, but because she knew better than anyone how to feed the hungry with dignity. Trader Ezekiel became her assistant. Even Madame Bai volunteered, her sharp tongue now used to defend the children instead of mock them. And every evening, when the center closed, Ngozi would stand in the spot where her broken stall used to be and look across the road at the place where 3 boys used to sit. But she no longer saw emptiness there. She saw hope. She saw proof that kindness is never wasted, that every act of compassion plants seeds that might take years to grow, but will eventually bloom into something beautiful. She saw 3 boys who became 3 men who changed not just their own lives, but an entire community. And she understood, finally, what her mother had meant all those years ago. A person who eats alone dies alone, but a person who feeds others lives forever. And on that street, people learned that food feeds the body. But kindness feeds destiny. If you were Ngozi, would you have done the same? Leave your answer in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for TJ's story. We bring you powerful tales that remind you why kindness matters, because it does. It always does. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their small acts of goodness are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story. Sparkles.